In the basement of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there is a corridor that few tourists ever see. The air is cool, artificially maintained at precisely 18 degrees Celsius. The humidity is controlled to the decimal point. Security guards stand at both ends, and only a handful of scholars are granted access each year. This corridor houses what might be humanity's most profound achievement and its deepest mystery: row upon row of climate-controlled cases. Inside each one, a face, human faces, preserved, waiting. Some have names carved on their coffins in hieroglyphs that took us 2,000 years to decipher. Others are nameless, anonymous souls who lived and died when Rome was nothing but marshland and Athens was a dream yet to be born. But all of them share something extraordinary. They are still here. After millennia of wars, floods, earthquakes, and the relentless march of time itself, they remain. Touch the glass and you can almost feel the impossible distance between you and them. 3,000 years. 4,000. 5. Civilizations have risen and fallen. Languages have been born, evolved, and died. The very stars have shifted in their courses. Yet these faces endure. The ancient Egyptians called it WT, the art of wrapping. We call it mummification. But neither term captures the audacity of what they accomplished. They defeated decomposition. They halted the biological clock that begins ticking the moment we draw our last breath. They took death itself and said, not yet, not completely, not forever. But here is the question that haunts every scientist, every archaeologist, every person who has ever stood before a mummy and truly looked, truly seen. How? In an age before microscopes revealed the existence of bacteria, before chemistry became a science, before anyone understood cellular decay or enzymes or molecular bonds, how did they preserve human tissue so perfectly that we, with all our advanced technology, still struggle to replicate it? Tonight, we embark on a journey into one of history's most beautiful and baffling mysteries. We will walk through time itself, from the first accidental discoveries in sun-baked sand to the elaborate laboratories hidden beneath desert temples. We will meet the master embalmers who guarded their knowledge like priests guarding the sacred flame. We will witness the clash between ancient wisdom and modern science, and we will confront an uncomfortable truth that challenges everything we believe about human progress. This is not merely a story about preserving the dead. This is a story about the lengths to which love will go, about knowledge that transcends time, about the human refusal to surrender to oblivion. This is about an art so sophisticated that even now, in an age where we can clone sheep and edit genes, we cannot fully understand how it was done. Prepare yourself. We are about to enter the realm where science meets sacred ritual, where death transforms into something approaching immortality, where ancient hands accomplished what modern technology cannot match. The embalmers are long dead, their secrets buried with them, but the bodies they prepared speak still, if we know how to listen. The question echoes through the corridors of that hidden museum basement, whispers from beneath the pyramids, calls from tombs scattered across the desert. What did they know that we have forgotten? And more troubling still, what if they knew things we cannot yet comprehend? The story begins not with intention, but with accident. Long before the first pharaoh united Egypt, before the concept of a kingdom even existed, nomadic peoples wandered the banks of the Nile. When someone died, they buried them in the sand, shallow graves marked perhaps with stones, certainly with grief. They expected decay. They expected the return to earth. What they found instead changed the course of human history. The desert preserved them. Imagine the shock of returning to a burial site years later, perhaps following seasonal migration routes and uncovering not bones, but a body. Skin dried to leather, but intact. Hair still attached. features recognizable. The person you knew, the person you mourned, still somehow present. To a people beginning to contemplate the mysteries of death and what might come after, this was revelation. This was proof that something of us could endure beyond the grave. This accident of preservation became an obsession that would consume Egyptian civilization for 3 millennia. But we must understand what mummification meant to them. It was never simply about keeping a body from rotting. The ancient Egyptians had a complex understanding of the soul, far more nuanced than our simple concept of a single spirit. They believed a person consisted of multiple spiritual components, each with its own nature and destiny. The Khat was your life force, your vital essence, born with you but separate from you. The Ba was your personality, depicted in art as a human-headed bird that could travel between the world of the living and the dead. The Ark was the transfigured spirit, what you could become if you successfully navigated the afterlife. The Ren was your name, so important that to erase someone's name was to kill them eternally. The Shayat was your shadow, your subtle presence in the world. And then there was the body itself, the Khat. For all these spiritual elements to function in the afterlife, the body had to remain intact. It was the anchor point, the home base, the physical reference point that allowed the Ka and Ba to recognize themselves. Without the body, the spiritual elements would be lost, wandering in darkness forever. This belief gave birth to an unprecedented endeavour, the systematic preservation of human remains on an industrial scale spanning thousands of years. The earliest true mummification attempts date to around 3500 BCE. These were crude compared to what would come later. Bodies were wrapped in linen soaked in resin, creating a rigid shell. Sometimes they placed the body in a fetal position, perhaps mimicking birth, suggesting death as a passage to a new existence. These early mummies often failed. The resin contracted as it dried, cracking the skin beneath. The internal organs left inside rotted and produced gases that burst through the preservation shell. But each failure taught something. Each disaster refined the technique. By the time of Djoser, the pharaoh who built the first pyramid around 2650 BCE, embalmers had learned to remove the internal organs. This was revolutionary. It showed they understood that decay begins from within, that the soft tissues of the organs would corrupt the entire body if left in place. They developed the technique of making a small incision in the left side of the abdomen and carefully extracting the stomach, liver, intestines, and lungs. These organs were then preserved separately in containers we now call canopic jars, each protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus. But here's something that should give us pause. To know which organs to remove and which to leave, they had to have detailed anatomical knowledge. They had to understand the geography of the human interior. This means they dissected bodies, many bodies, over generations. Long before ancient Greece claimed to invent anatomy, Egyptian embalmers were mapping the human interior with precision. Let me introduce you to someone remarkable. We don't know his name. Egyptian embalmers, for all their importance, rarely left personal records. But from the tomb of Irtiaru, a chantress of Ammon who died around 650 BCE, we can reconstruct the work of the embalmer who prepared her. Modern CT scans have revealed his techniques in extraordinary detail. He removed her brain through her nose using the transnasal approach, carefully breaking the ethmoid bone and extracting the tissue in small fragments. He made the abdominal incision with such precision that it's barely visible even under magnification. He removed her internal organs and replaced them with packages of linen soaked in resin, restoring her body's natural shape. He positioned artificial eyes beneath her eyelids so she would appear to be sleeping rather than dead. He wrapped her with such care that the bandages remained intact for 26 centuries. This embalmer was an artist, a scientist, a priest conducting a sacred ritual, all of these identities merged in the act of mummification. and he is just one of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of embalmers who practice this art over Egypt's long history. Each one trained for years, learning from masters, practicing on the bodies of the poor, before being trusted with the wealthy and powerful. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, described the embalmers' workshops with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. He wrote of 3 classes of mummification, priced according to quality. The most expensive method took 70 days and involved the full ritual treatment. The middle method was less elaborate, but still effective. The cheapest method was little more than washing the body and wrapping it in plain linen. But even the poorest mummies, even the ones prepared with minimal treatment, often survived better than our modern attempts at preservation. Herodotus tells us that after removing the internal organs, the embalmers would fill the belly with pure myrrh, cassia, and other aromatic substances. But modern analysis reveals the reality was far more complex. They used sophisticated mixtures of plant resins, oils, salts, and other compounds. Some of these materials came from far away: frankincense from Somalia, myrrh from Arabia, cedar oil from Lebanon, bitumen from the Dead Sea. Mummification wasn't just a local practice, it was part of an extensive trade network spanning the ancient world. The use of natron was crucial. Natron is a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate, found in dry lake beds. The Egyptians discovered that burying a body in natron would draw out moisture through osmosis, essentially freeze-drying the tissue. But here's what's remarkable. They didn't just pack natron around the body randomly. They understood optimal ratios, knew how long to leave the body buried, recognized the signs of proper desiccation. How did they learn this? Through experimentation, certainly. Through observation. Through generations of accumulated knowledge passed from master to apprentice. But also perhaps through an intuitive understanding of natural processes that we, in our reliance on written formulas and precise measurements, have lost. The Great Pyramids of Giza were already ancient by the time mummification reached its peak during the New Kingdom, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE. This was the golden age of Egyptian embalmers. The techniques had been refined to near perfection. The materials were the finest quality. The embalmers were consummate professionals, organized into guilds with strict standards and hierarchies. Picture a mummification workshop in Thebes during the reign of Amenhotep III. It's located on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead, far from the living city. The building is marked with protective hieroglyphs and images of Anubis, the jackal-headed god who invented mummification. Inside, the air is thick with incense, not just to mask odours, but to create sacred space. This is holy ground. A body arrives, carried by mourning family members. The master embalmer, wearing the mask of Anubis, receives them. Prayers are spoken. Agreements are made regarding the level of treatment. The family departs. Now the real work begins. The body is laid on a slanted stone table with channels carved for drainage. Junior embalmers wash it with natron water and palm wine. The master embalmer makes his first examination. He looks for signs of disease, injury, decomposition. If the person died suddenly, if the body is fresh, the preservation will be easier. If death was slow, if illness ravaged the body, if days passed before the embalmers received it, the work becomes more challenging. The master makes the first cut. Swift, sure. Years of practice guide his hand. The bronze blade slides through skin and muscle. The abdomen is opened. Now comes the delicate work of removing organs without damaging them. The liver, large and rich with blood, must come out intact. The stomach, the intestines carefully uncoiled from the abdomen. The lungs, the diaphragm. Each organ is washed, treated with natron, perfumed, wrapped, and placed in its designated canopic jar. The heart remains. Always the heart. It is the seat of intelligence, emotion, memory, identity. Without the heart, the deceased cannot testify in the afterlife when Osiris weighs it against the feather of Ma'at. The heart must stay with the body. Now the most technically challenging procedure, removing the brain. A long bronze hook, thin as a wire, is inserted through the nostril. The embalmer probes upward, finding the ethmoid bone, that delicate lattice at the base of the skull. With controlled force, he breaks through. The hook enters the cranial cavity. Now he must liquefy the brain tissue, breaking it up with careful circular motions. Once liquefied, the brain can be drained out through the nose or hooked out in small pieces. This requires tremendous skill. Push too hard, and you'll break through the skull somewhere visible. Be too timid, and brain tissue will remain inside to rot. The Egyptians saw the brain as useless, packing material for the skull. How wrong they were, yet how skilled at removing it. This irony captures something essential about ancient knowledge. They could be simultaneously wrong in theory, yet masterful in practice. They misunderstood function, but perfected technique. With the organs removed, the body is packed inside and out with natron. Not wet natron, but dry crystals. The body is then buried in a bed of natron for 40 days, 40 sacred days. The number appears repeatedly in mythology and religion. 40 days and nights of rain in the flood narrative, 40 years wandering the desert, 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness. The number represents transformation, trial, completion. During these 40 days, the natron works its magic. It draws moisture from the tissues, creating an environment where bacteria cannot survive. The body slowly mummifies, tissue by tissue, cell by cell. The embalmers check regularly, adding fresh natron where needed, ensuring the process proceeds correctly. When the body emerges from the natron, it has transformed. It is lighter, darker, hardened. It has lost 30% or more of its weight, but it is stable. It will not decay. The embalmers wash it again, this time with fragrant oils. They massage the skin to make it supple. They fill the emptied abdomen with sawdust, linen, resin-soaked packets, sometimes even with sand from sacred sites, restoring the body's natural contours. And then begins the wrapping. This is where artistry truly shines. Starting with the head, then fingers and toes individually, then limbs, then torso, the embalmers wrap the body in hundreds of yards of linen. Between the layers, they place amulets. Protection for the journey ahead. The heart scarab inscribed with spells to prevent the heart from testifying against the deceased. The Djed pillar for stability. The Tiat knot for protection. The Wadjet eye for wholeness and health. As they wrap, they recite spells from the Book of the Dead. These aren't just pretty words. They are power. They are protection. They are the instructions and passwords the deceased will need to navigate the underworld, to pass through its gates, to reach the field of reeds, where the blessed dead live in paradise forever. The final layer might be a shroud painted with the image of the deceased, or covered with protective deities. For royalty or the very wealthy, there might be a cartonnage mask, made of layers of linen and plaster, painted with the idealized face of the deceased covered in gold leaf. Gold, the flesh of the gods, incorruptible and eternal. The completed mummy is placed in a coffin, itself covered with protective spells and images. Sometimes multiple coffins nest within each other. The coffin goes into a stone sarcophagus. The sarcophagus is sealed in a tomb filled with everything the deceased might need in the afterlife. And there the mummy rests, protected by walls of stone, by spells of power, by the enduring love of those who prepared it. This was the art at its zenith. This was the culmination of 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge, refined technique, and sacred devotion. Every mummy was a masterpiece. Every preservation was a victory over time itself. And then it was lost. Christianity came to Egypt. Mummification was declared pagan. The workshops closed. The embalmers converted or died. Within a single generation, knowledge that had been carefully maintained for 3 millennia vanished like water poured onto desert sand. The dark centuries came. Egypt forgot what it had been. The hieroglyphs became mysterious symbols, beautiful but unreadable. The tombs became targets for looters. And the mummies became commodities. In medieval Europe, there arose a horrifying trade. Mummy, ground from pulverized Egyptian mummies, was sold as medicine. Supposed to cure everything from bruises to plague, wealthy Europeans consumed the preserved flesh of ancient Egyptians. Entire mummies were shipped to Europe, ground in mills, packaged in jars, sold in apothecaries next to herbs and mercury. The very preservation, meant to ensure eternal life, became the reason for wholesale destruction. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Egyptian mummies had become curiosities, entertainment. British aristocrats held mummy unwrapping parties. They would gather in parlours, dressed in finery, drinking wine, as they peeled away layers of ancient linen to see what lay beneath. Sometimes they found treasures, amulets of gold. Sometimes they found only desiccated flesh that crumbled at the touch. Either way, in a single evening of entertainment, they destroyed what had survived for 3,000 years. This casual vandalism continued until a few voices began to speak up. Giovanni Battista Belzoni, an Italian circus strongman turned archaeologist, began systematically exploring Egyptian tombs in the 1810s. He wasn't much better than a treasure hunter, truth be told. He damaged much of what he found. But he also documented it, drawing and describing the mummies and tombs before they were completely destroyed. Then came Jean-François Champollion, who in 1822 finally deciphered hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone. Suddenly, the mute stone spoke. The painted walls had voices. The names written on coffins could be read. The mummies were no longer anonymous objects, but people. Real people with identities, with lives, with stories. This changed everything. The scientific study of mummification could finally begin. Auguste Mariette founded the Egyptian Antiquities Service in 1858, creating the first real protection for ancient sites. Mummies began to be unwrapped carefully, by scholars taking notes, making observations. Gaston Maspero succeeded Mariette and made a discovery that shook the world. In 1881, at Deir el-Bahari, near Luxor, a secret cache of mummies was found hidden in a cliff tomb. 40 royal mummies. Ramesses II, Seti Bafun, Thutmose III, Ahmose Rephison. Some of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, all hidden together by priests in ancient times to protect them from tomb robbers. When these mummies were brought to Cairo by boat, something extraordinary happened. As the boat sailed down the Nile, Egyptian villagers lined the banks. Men fired rifles into the air in salute. Women wailed in mourning, throwing dust on their heads. After 3,000 years, the pharaohs were still recognized, still honored, still somehow present. When Ramesses II was unwrapped and examined, scientists gasped. His face was still recognizable from his statues. His reddish hair was still attached. His skin, though darkened and leathery, was intact. Under microscopes, cellular structures were visible. His body was so well preserved that when it was sent to Paris for treatment for fungal infection in 1976, French officials issued him a passport. They gave a dead pharaoh an official passport, because he was, in a very real sense, still present, still himself, still Ramesses the Great. But how? The question became urgent. Howard Carter, discovering Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, found a mummy so perfectly preserved that the golden mask fitted the head exactly. The facial features matched the mask. 3,000 years dead, yet clearly, undeniably human. Modern science should have been able to explain this easily. We understand biology, chemistry, bacterial action, molecular bonds. We have electron microscopes and mass spectrometers and DNA sequences. We should be able to look at a mummy, analyze its composition, and replicate the process. We cannot. Oh, we understand pieces of it. We know natron desiccates tissue. We know certain resins have antibacterial properties. We know that removing organs prevents internal decay. We know that wrapping in multiple layers creates a barrier against external contamination. We know all the individual components. But when modern embalmers tried to replicate the process, they failed. In the 1990s, Dr Bob Brier, perhaps the foremost modern expert on mummification, decided to attempt the first full Egyptian-style mummification in 2,000 years. He partnered with Dr Ronald Wade, an anatomist from the Maryland State Anatomy Board. They obtained a donated cadaver. They imported natron from Egypt. They gathered the tools, the oils, the resins, everything they could identify from ancient sources. They followed the process as documented by Herodotus and pieced together from archaeological evidence. For weeks, they worked. They eviscerated the body. They removed the brain through the nose using the transnasal approach. They buried the body in natron for 35 days. They unwrapped it, finding the tissues successfully preserved. They wrapped it in linen, placing amulets between the layers. They documented everything. The result? A mummy. But not an Egyptian mummy. Not really. The skin was too brittle. The colour was wrong. The overall quality was nowhere near the ancient standards. Dr Brier himself admitted, "We proved we could approximate their methods, but we also proved there's something we're missing." What are we missing? That question has consumed researchers ever since. Advanced chemical analysis has revealed some answers. Dr Stephen Buckley at the University of York has conducted some of the most sophisticated analyses ever performed on mummy tissue and residues. Using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, he's identified compounds in the embalming materials that ancient texts never mentioned. He found that the resins were far more complex than simple tree sap. They were carefully prepared mixtures, sometimes heated to specific temperatures to alter their chemical properties, sometimes aged for months or years before use. Some contain natural antibacterial agents like guaiacol that we didn't scientifically identify until the 19th century. Yet the embalmers used them 3,000 years ago. How did they know? They didn't have chemical theory. They couldn't analyze molecular structures. Yet their choices were chemically sound, often optimal. This suggests sophisticated empirical knowledge developed over centuries of experimentation. Trial and error over generational time scales, with knowledge carefully preserved and passed down. But there's more. Recent studies have found evidence that the embalmers were innovating, adapting, improving their techniques over time. Earlier dynasties used simpler mixtures. Later periods showed increasingly sophisticated chemistry. They were conducting research in effect. Long-term studies spanning centuries, with each generation building on the last. Then there's the mystery of technique. Chemical knowledge is one thing, skill is another. How do you learn the exact pressure needed to remove a brain through the nose without breaking through the skull? How do you judge when the body has been in natron long enough but not too long? How do you wrap hundreds of yards of linen with perfect tension, tight enough to compress, but not so tight as to damage tissue? These are skills that require hands-on practice, lots of practice. Modern surgeons train for years before they can perform operations with confidence. How much more training did ancient embalmers need to master the delicate procedures of mummification? And how many bodies did they practice on? We find the successes in tombs, beautifully preserved. But how many failures rotted away before they perfected their craft? There's also the question of individual variation. Not all mummies are equal. Some from the same period, even from the same workshop, are better preserved than others. Why? Was it differences in embalmer skill? Differences in the deceased's health or body chemistry? Differences in materials? We don't know. CT scans have revealed another puzzle. Many mummies show evidence of what we might call shortcuts or errors. Organs left inside that should have been removed. Brain matter still in the skull. Improper wrapping. Yet even these poorly done mummies often survived for thousands of years. Meanwhile, our carefully prepared modern mummies, done with full knowledge and proper materials, start deteriorating within decades. What's going on? Are we missing something fundamental about the chemistry? About the environmental conditions? About the handling and storage? Or is there something else, something we don't even know to look for? Some researchers have suggested that Egypt's unique climate played a role we can't replicate. The extreme aridity, the specific soil chemistry, the types of bacteria present in that environment, all may have contributed to preservation in ways we can't duplicate in climate-controlled laboratory conditions. Mummification may have been as much about the environment as about the technique. Others point to the spiritual dimension. The ancient Egyptians didn't separate sacred from practical. Every step of mummification was accompanied by prayers, rituals, invocations. Modern scientists dismiss these as superstition, focusing only on the physical and chemical aspects. But what if there's something we're missing by taking this reductionist approach? I'm not suggesting literal magic, but consider. The embalmers worked in a state of focused reverence. They viewed their work as sacred duty. They were calm, careful, meditative. Modern morticians, however skilled, approach embalming as a technical job. Could the psychological state of the practitioner somehow affect the outcome? Could focused attention and care result in better handling, better judgment, better results in ways too subtle to measure but significant over the long term? There's precedent for this in other crafts. Master violin makers of the 18th century created instruments we can't replicate, even though we know the materials and basic techniques. Master blacksmiths in medieval Japan created swords with properties modern metallurgists struggle to explain. In both cases, the crafts were approached as spiritual practices, not just technical procedures. The makers were in dialogue with their materials, responding to subtle cues, making micro-adjustments based on intuition honed over lifetimes. Could mummification have been similar? A practice so refined that explicit knowledge couldn't capture it all, where tacit knowledge, embodied skill, intuitive judgment played crucial roles. We're also confronting a humbling possibility that ancient peoples working without modern technology could achieve things we cannot. This challenges our narrative of progress. We like to think humanity moves ever forward, that each generation knows more and can do more than the last. But what if in some domains we've regressed? What if we've traded depth for breadth, mastery for convenience? The embalmers spent their entire lives perfecting one craft. Modern morticians learn embalming as one skill among many, in schools that compress training into months or a few years. Ancient apprenticeships lasted decades. Knowledge was passed one-on-one, master to student, through demonstration and practice. Can classroom learning ever fully replace that? And there's the time factor. Ancient embalmers spent 70 days on a single body. 70 days of focused, careful, meticulous work. Modern embalming is done in hours or days. We're faster. But are we better? The results suggest not. The conflict we face is not just scientific, but philosophical. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, the gaps in our understanding, the possibility that ancient wisdom contained truths we've not yet rediscovered. It challenges us to approach the past with humility rather than condescension, to see ancient peoples not as primitives we've surpassed, but as sophisticated practitioners whose achievements still impress and mystify us. The mummies stand as silent witnesses to this conflict. They exist. We can touch them, study them, analyze them. They prove that what seems impossible was achieved. Yet we cannot fully explain how, cannot fully replicate it. They are simultaneously evidence of ancient knowledge and proof of modern ignorance. And that creates a tension, an intellectual and emotional discomfort. We don't like mysteries we can't solve. We don't like admitting there are things our ancestors knew that we don't. So we study harder, analyze deeper, try again and again to unlock the secrets. Because somewhere, hidden in those preserved tissues and ancient resins, lies knowledge that was lost, knowledge we desperately want to recover, not just for academic curiosity, but because if they could do this, what else could they do? What other knowledge was lost when civilizations fell, when traditions ended, when the last practitioner died without passing on their skills? How much of humanity's accumulated wisdom has vanished into time? The mummies whisper a troubling truth. We are not as advanced as we think. We have not surpassed the ancients in all ways. In some domains, we are still playing catch-up to people who died thousands of years ago. That is the challenge. That is the conflict. And it remains unresolved. But let us not end in frustration. Let us not dwell only on what we've lost. Because in recent years, as technology has advanced and our approach has matured, we are beginning to understand. We are beginning to see. And what we're discovering is more extraordinary than we imagined. The triumph is not that we've fully solved the mystery. We haven't. The triumph is that we've learned to ask better questions. We've learned to see mummification not as a single technique, but as a sophisticated system, a holistic practice that integrated chemistry, biology, craftsmanship, and yes, spiritual conviction into something greater than the sum of its parts. Modern analysis has revealed layers of sophistication we missed before. Take the wrapping technique. For years, we thought it was primarily about creating a physical barrier. But high-resolution imaging has shown that the wrapping pattern affects how moisture moves through the mummy, creating microenvironments with different humidity levels. The outer layers protect from external moisture. The inner layers, soaked in resin, create a sealed environment. The middle layers allow limited air circulation, preventing condensation. It's a remarkably sophisticated moisture management system designed without any theoretical understanding of humidity or evaporation or molecular diffusion. Or consider the resins. Dr. Buckley's chemical analysis revealed that embalmers were blending resins from different sources to create compounds with specific properties. Pistachia resin from the Mediterranean combined with plant resins from the Sinai, mixed with beeswax from local hives, creating a mixture that was simultaneously waterproof, antimicrobial, and flexible enough not to crack as the mummy moved or was transported. This wasn't random. This was sophisticated materials science, conducted through empirical testing over centuries. Recent work has also revealed regional variations in technique that suggest different schools or traditions of embalming. Theban embalmers favoured certain resin mixtures. Memphis embalmers used different wrapping patterns. Alexandria developed its own approaches influenced by Greek anatomical knowledge. What we've been treating as a monolithic practice was actually a rich, diverse tradition with multiple valid approaches, each adapted to local materials and cultural contexts. And we're finding that the spiritual aspects weren't separate from the practical. They were integrated. The prayers recited during wrapping weren't just ritual. They helped maintain the embalmer's focus, created a meditative state that enhanced attention to detail. The sacred nature of the work ensured that embalmers took their time, didn't rush, maintained the careful, methodical approach that proper preservation required. The spiritual framework wasn't an add-on, it was part of what made the system work. We're also discovering that mummification wasn't unique to Egypt. The Chinchorro people of South America were mummifying their dead by 5000 BCE, 2000 years before the Egyptians. But they used completely different techniques. They disarticulated bodies, removing all soft tissue, then reassembled the skeleton with sticks and padding, creating an armature, essentially a statue with real bones inside. Then they covered everything with clay and painted it. The result was more sculptural than preserved, but it served the same purpose, maintaining the body's form beyond death. The Incas practiced mummification through freeze-drying, exposing bodies to the cold, dry air of high Andes mountains. Natural processes did the preservation. Some of these Incan mummies, found at high-altitude burial sites, are so well preserved that they look like sleeping children, not centuries-old corpses. The Buddhist monks of Japan practiced self-mummification, a horrifying but fascinating process. They would slowly modify their diet over years, eventually eating only tree bark and resin, slowly poisoning themselves with compounds that would make their tissues inhospitable to decay bacteria. When they finally died, they were preserved from within by the toxins they'd consumed. This is mummification as ultimate spiritual discipline, transforming the body through will and devotion. Each culture developed mummification independently, using locally available materials and techniques, yet all were trying to achieve the same goal. This suggests mummification is a universal human response to mortality when cultures reach a certain level of complexity. It's not an Egyptian quirk, but a fundamental expression of human consciousness grappling with death. Modern science has also benefited tremendously from studying mummies. We've learned about ancient diseases, identified genetic disorders, traced migration patterns through DNA analysis. The mummies are biological time capsules, preserving information that would otherwise be lost forever. They've taught us about diet, health, climate, trade networks, and cultural practices. In a very real sense, the embalmers created the world's oldest and most complete medical database. And here's something beautiful. Modern medical imaging technology, developed to look inside living bodies, has given us new ways to study mummies without damaging them. CT scans, MRI, 3D reconstruction. We can now examine every detail of a mummy without unwrapping it, without touching it, preserving it for future generations, while still learning its secrets. The technology meant to preserve life is now helping us understand death. There's also a strange loop of influence happening. Our study of ancient embalming techniques is informing modern preservation methods. Researchers working on organ preservation for transplant have looked at Egyptian techniques for inspiration. The antibacterial properties of natural resins are being investigated for medical applications. The moisture management strategies used in wrapping are informing textile engineering. Knowledge flows both ways across the millennia. But perhaps the deepest revelation is philosophical. Mummification forces us to confront what we believe about death, about memory, about the importance of preserving the individual. The ancient Egyptians invested enormous resources in mummification because they believed the individual mattered, that each person was unique and irreplaceable, that identity should be preserved even beyond death. This stands in stark contrast to some modern attitudes that view death as simply the end, that see bodies as mere containers to be disposed of efficiently. The Egyptians would have found this horrifying. To them, the body was sacred, the physical manifestation of a unique soul, deserving of care and preservation even after death. We might think them superstitious, but they might think us callous. Who's right? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps the question itself points to something profound about human nature, about the tension between accepting mortality and refusing to surrender to it. The mummies also reveal something about love, because that's what mummification ultimately was. An act of love, families spending 70 days and significant wealth to ensure their dead would be preserved. Embalmers taking meticulous care with each body, treating strangers with the same careful reverence they would give their own family. A civilization investing massive resources in technologies and practices solely to honour the dead. This love transcends time. When we look at a mummy, we're looking at someone who was loved 3,000 years ago, loved enough that others worked for months to preserve them, loved enough that they were buried with care and protected with spells and hidden from tomb robbers. That love echoes across the ages. We feel it still. And here's the ultimate revelation. The embalmers succeeded, not in granting immortality, no one can do that, but in defeating Oblivion. The people they preserved are still here. We know their names. We see their faces. We can study their lives. They achieved what they set out to do. The car has somewhere to return to. The body endures. The identity persists. When Ramesses II was welcomed at Paris airport with full honours in 1976, when Egyptian villagers mourned the passing of royal mummies in 1881, when archaeologists carefully excavate and preserve mummies with reverence, the embalmers' work continues. Their gift to the future persists. This is the triumph. Not that we've matched their skill. We haven't. Not that we've explained every mystery. We haven't. The triumph is that they succeeded in what they attempted. Against all odds, against time itself, against decay and disaster, and 3,000 years of history, they preserved the dead. And in doing so, they preserved something essential about human dignity, about the importance of memory, about love's refusal to surrender to death. We are beginning to understand that mummification was never just about chemistry or technique. It was about asserting meaning in the face of meaninglessness. It was about declaring that individuals matter, that we are more than temporary arrangements of molecules, that something of us should and must endure. The revelation is that ancient wisdom and modern science are not opposed. They're complementary. We need the ancient perspective, the holistic approach, the integration of practical and spiritual. But we also need modern analytical tools, scientific rigour, empirical testing. Together, they give us a fuller picture than either could alone. We are rediscovering not just how mummification worked, but why it mattered. And in that rediscovery, we're connecting with something essential about human nature. We're remembering what it means to care for the dead, to honour memory, to insist that love and identity transcend the grave. The embalmers left us more than preserved bodies. They left us a legacy of care, a model of devotion, a reminder that humans are capable of remarkable things when motivated by love and guided by accumulated wisdom. They showed us that death need not be the final word, that we can push back against oblivion, that preservation is possible if we're willing to invest the time, skill, and reverence it requires. This is the triumph. This is the revelation. The lost art of mummification is being found again. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to remember, enough to learn, enough to be humbled by what they achieved and inspired to achieve our own version of it in our own time. The ancient embalmers are long dead, but their work lives on, and that, ultimately, is what mummification was always about. We have travelled far tonight, from accidental discoveries in desert sand to sophisticated workshops in ancient Thebes, from the casual destruction of mummies in Victorian parlours to the reverent scientific study in modern laboratories. We have walked with embalmers who were priests and chemists, artists and scientists. We have confronted mysteries we still cannot fully solve and witnessed revelations that change how we see the ancient world. The lost art of mummification stands before us as more than historical curiosity. It stands as testament to human capability, to what focused dedication can achieve, to knowledge that transcends time. It reminds us that progress is not linear, that we can lose as well as gain, that ancient peoples possess sophistication we're still working to understand. But more than that, mummification reveals something essential about what it means to be human. We alone among Earth's creatures know we will die. We alone contemplate what that means, what comes after, how we'll be remembered. And mummification was one civilization's answer to those eternal questions. An answer that said, we will preserve, we will remember, we will ensure that death is not complete erasure. When you stand in a museum and gaze at a mummy through protective glass, remember what you're seeing. Not a curiosity, not an artifact, a person, someone who lived and loved and laughed and cried, someone with a name, a family, a story, someone who mattered enough that others invested months of skilled labour to preserve them, someone who was loved 3,000 years ago and whose body still bears witness to that love. Remember too the embalmers, those nameless craftsmen who spent their lives perfecting an art we still struggle to replicate, who combined practical knowledge with spiritual conviction, who created preservation techniques sophisticated enough to challenge our modern science, who passed their knowledge carefully through generations, who did all of this not for fame or glory, but for the sacred duty of honouring the dead. The techniques may be partially lost. The exact formulations of resins, the intuitive understanding gained through decades of practice, the subtle adjustments made based on feel rather than measurement, these may never be fully recovered, but the spirit behind the practice endures. It endures every time we honour the dead, every time we preserve memory, every time we insist that individuals matter beyond their brief time walking this earth. We may never perfectly replicate Egyptian mummification. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some knowledge is meant to belong to its time, to the specific culture and context that created it. What we can do is learn from it. Learn humility, recognizing that ancient peoples achieved remarkable things without modern technology. Learn to question our assumptions about progress and superiority. Learn to approach the past with respect rather than condescension. The mysteries remain. Even with all our technology, all our analysis, all our research, we cannot fully explain how they did what they did. That limitation is important. It keeps us curious. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that there is always more to learn, always deeper understanding to pursue. As you leave this journey tonight, carry with you the image of an embalmer's workshop, the flickering oil lamps casting shadows on walls covered with protective hieroglyphs, the smell of incense and myrrh, the body lying on the slanted stone table being transformed through skilled hands and sacred ritual from mortal flesh to enduring form, the prayers being spoken, the spells being invoked, the careful wrapping that will protect for millennia. And remember this, what they were doing was not so different from what we still do when we care for our dead, when we preserve their memory, when we refuse to let them vanish completely into the darkness. The technology changes, the methods evolve, but the fundamental human impulse remains the same. We love, we remember, we preserve. We insist that those we care about matter beyond their death. Mummification was the ultimate expression of this impulse, taken to its most extreme, most sophisticated, most successful form. The Egyptians looked at death and said, we can defeat this. Not death itself, that's inevitable. But we can defeat complete dissolution. We can ensure the body endures. And for 3,000 years, they succeeded. The embalmers are gone, their workshops are ruins, their techniques are partially lost. But the bodies they preserved remain, still here, still whole, still bearing witness to the skill and devotion that created them. They are messages from the distant past, reaching across millennia to speak to us about love, memory, dignity, preservation. And they're still teaching us about chemistry we didn't know they knew, about anatomy we thought we discovered, about sophisticated systems thinking applied to practical problems, about the integration of science and spirit, practical and sacred, about what humans can achieve when motivated by profound conviction and guided by accumulated wisdom. The lost art of mummification is being found again. Piece by piece, insight by insight, we're recovering what was forgotten. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to marvel, enough to learn, enough to be inspired to achieve our own remarkable things in our own ways. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson, that every age has its own challenges, its own mysteries to solve, its own arts to perfect. The Egyptians mastered preservation of the dead. We're working on different challenges. Preservation of the environment, preservation of knowledge, perhaps someday preservation of life itself in new ways. Different challenges, same underlying impulse, same determination to push back against loss, decay, forgetting. The mummies stand as proof that it's possible, that dedicated humans, working carefully over long periods, can achieve things that seem impossible. That knowledge carefully accumulated and passed down can compound into mastery. That love and reverence can be expressed through skilled action. That we can create things that outlast us, that speak for us after we're gone. This is what the embalmers achieved. This is what the mummies preserve, not just bodies, but a message, a promise, a proof that humans matter, that we can endure, that love transcends death. That careful work performed with reverence can create enduring value. The workshop is closed, the secrets are partly lost, but the dream lives on, the dream of preservation, the dream of memory, the dream of making meaning in the face of mortality. Thank you for walking this journey with me, through ancient tombs and modern laboratories, through mysteries unsolved and revelations discovered, through the story of an art so sophisticated we still can't fully replicate it, a practice so profound it still moves us millennia later. The embalmers spoke across time through their work. The mummies carry their message forward, and that message is simple yet profound. We were here. We lived. We mattered. And we took care of each other even in death, even across thousands of years, even into eternity. This is the lost art of mummification, still teaching us, still challenging us, still inviting us to remember that we stand on the shoulders of ancestors who achieved remarkable things, and asking us, what will we achieve? What will we preserve? What will we pass forward to those who come after us? These are eternal questions, and the mummies, silent and enduring, wait patiently for our answers.